Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the Abyss Diana MR, a $3,000 open back planar magnetic headphone from Abyss. This was a kind loan to me from Audio46, who is a retailer based in New York. Audio46 has made no attempt to influence my opinion on this piece one way or the other, so all thoughts you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. The link in the description down below for Audio46, where you can click over and buy this, will be an affiliate link. So if you like what I say about this product and you want to buy it and you want to support my efforts here on this channel, please consider using that affiliate link and I will get a small kickback. And I use affiliate link money to put right back into the channel to buy support gear and just new gear to review and cover shipping costs and things like that. Before we get to shameless self-promotion, please allow me to say a couple of things to set up the video right here. Number one, this is my fourth Abyss headphone to review, or as I like to describe it, this is my fourth time staring into the Abyss. Two mixed results, I would say. There are a couple of Abyss models that I have reviewed that were very technically impressive, like the Diana Phi and the HE1000se Final Thoughts, being examples where I could hear the technical excellence behind them, but the tuning and the fit and all of that just wasn't for me. Then there was the Diana TC, which I reviewed back in the spring of 2022, I believe, and that I just declared as a miss. And there were some comments about that made in various places that there were arguments about why I heard what I heard on the Diana TC that I don't think were quite accurate, and then I'm going to try to get out ahead of the same kind of comments here, because it's a mixed bag again on this one, honestly. I do think it is a little bit behind in technical performance compared to its peers, around $3,000. But there is a presentational uniqueness here that I think will appeal to some. And so I'm going to try to unpack all of that as we get in through the review here. So let's do shameless self-promotion, and then we'll come back on the other side and we'll get to why I say all of those things.
Hi, I'm Wave Theory's human companion, and he wants you to know that your support of this YouTube channel helps keep the reviews coming. If you enjoy Wave Theory's honest, thorough style, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the links in the description below to sign up for the Patreon or send him a tip through PayPal. All right, enjoy the musings.
Let's start with what you get for your approximately $3,000 US here. So again, you get an open back planar magnetic headphone that is, I mean, it's well built. Like I've not really had an issue with Abyss's build quality by and large. One exception to that, which I will point out to you. Now, I do have some comfort issues with them and all of that. Now, let me also say that I have avoided watching reviews of the Diana MR because I figured at some point one would land in here. And in general, I try not to watch other reviews of new products that I have a reasonable sense of knowing that they're going to come in and I'm going to get a chance to review them, just because I try to not bias myself that way. But I can't avoid all of the chatter out there because I'm on the forums, you know, and I scroll through YouTube, and, you know, because I'm an audio reviewer, other audio reviewers on YouTube are in my YouTube algorithm feed and all of that. And so, you know, sometimes I can see basically what they are saying just by the way they title their videos and like all of this kind of stuff. So I hear chatter and all that nonetheless. And some of the chatter here about this one is that they have improved the Diana series. And some of the chatter that I heard implied to me that some of the tuning issues have been smoothed out, and that it's also one of the easier to drive Abyss models out there, so that it's more portable amp friendly, and that they have also done some modifications for the comfort. So bringing it back to what I was just saying there. And let's go ahead and address that comfort issue here right away. Like with the pads in the position where the seams are down and back, these are reasonably comfortable to me anyway, and they stay on my head reasonably well. Previous Abyss models were kind of the same. They were always the most comfortable when the pads were such that they kind of sealed around the ear for me. And then I ran into comfort issues when that was not true. More on that in a moment. So did the improvement here improve over previous Abyss models? I can't really say for sure because it's getting nigh 2 years now since I have had an Abyss model or a Diana model on my head like this, so I can't really say. Okay, now beyond that, let's talk about that pad thing there for a moment here, because if you're not familiar, the Abyss pad system here is made to rotate. These are held on magnetically, and then there are pins right here on the headphone driver housing itself, and then there are matching grooves on the back of the pad, and you can rotate through on the Abyss or on the Diana series 4 different orientations of the pads here. And that changes the sound as you do so. And I actually like that they did that. That level of customizability in terms of the sound there, built into the unit, is a cool idea. The first Diana that I ever reviewed, the Phi, back a few years ago now, did have an issue where the glue that held the leather part of the pad, or the material of the pad, onto this plastic and then a ring that somewhere in there are magnets buried in it to hold it on, but the glue would fail. They seem to have largely fixed that because these are the ported pads, these are the stock pads. I listened to both, okay? See the difference there on the back. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a moment. But both of them, the glue there seems to be more reliable, and just it feels fairly solid. So I think they largely got that worked out, which is good. Okay, but this pad system, again, it does change the tuning of the headphone. So we'll talk more about that when we get to the sound here in just a little bit. Okay. So anyway, you get the stock pads, these here, when you spend $3,000, so that comes in the package and all of that. You get this nice little carrying case, pretty solidly built, okay? I just had it open, okay? Opens up like this, looks like this on the inside, does a pretty nice job holding the headphone in there. It's pretty tough and all of that, so protect it while you have it in a suitcase or a backpack or something like that while traveling, and so forth. Here is the stock cable that it comes with, and you can see that it's got a little bit of memory to it. The other thing that I noticed is here at the split, you can kind of see it happening here. It kind of twists around on itself a little bit. Okay, I hope you can see that. And I have seen it really loop around on itself a bunch of times and would have to come back and separate it out. And then you just see that it has memory. It coils up around on itself like that a lot. Okay, and all that. Anyway, there are, this cable is about 1.5 meters or 5 feet long. It's got 2.5 millimeter TS jack, plugs, on the headphone end that come in this proprietary shaped housing, or barrel, or whatever you want to call that there. And then this one happened to be terminated in 4-pin XLR, which I asked Audio 46 to send me that version because a lot of the amps that I would be plugging this into are 4-pin XLR, and then I have adapters to get them into other amp types if needed. Okay, cable entry on the headphone itself. Common for the Diana series is we have these recessed jacks right here that do fit. Okay, the plugs on the, let me show you what that looks like here. Okay, that fit the plugs. The plugs are made to fit, I should say. That's how it should be said. And yeah, you got to get it lined up right, and I can never remember how it goes. There, almost had it. You can see once I plug it in, you can just kind of leave it because it only goes, there we go. Okay, nope, that's not it. See, you're watching this, yeah. There we go. Once it gets in there, it's all nice and snug, but it is a proprietary shape, and that opening is very narrow, so aftermarket cabling gets a little challenging. Now, JPS Labs, who's the parent company of Abyss and all of that, makes cables and all of that for that, and so they will have terminations, obviously, that fit that, but then aftermarket beyond them, you're just going to have to be careful about what fits in there and what doesn't. I mostly used the stock cable for this. I had a friend separately loan me the ported pads that are on here, and that same friend sent a DHC Molecule Elite cable that had plugs that would fit these jacks in here, and I tried that cable on here too. We'll get to sound impressions on that a little bit later on. Okay, but there it is. The headphone is rather light, and so, I mean, the headband here does get a little bit, like, I do feel a little bit of pressure on the top of my head when I hold it on there. Like, I can feel it right there, but it's light enough that didn't really bother me a whole lot, even after some longer listening sessions and so forth. Okay. Let's keep it rolling here with, let's talk about, like, why do you want to change the pad position on here? Well, one, it breaks the seal. So if you use the stock pads, which again, they have this smooth thing on the back right here, then when this is on your head, usually with the seam here, which is the thick part of the pad, down and back, this will enclose, okay, basically entirely around the ear, okay, all of that, and that seals the headphone, just like any other headphone that, that's out there, at least most others that fit properly and all of that. And that helps control some of the resonant frequency behavior of the planar magnetic driver, which tends to be in the bass region usually. Breaking the seal on this headphone or any kind of allows for that resonant frequency to kind of do resonant frequency things in a way, and that will often increase the bass output in a narrow range of frequencies, but then sacrifice some bass extension down towards the sub-bass. So Abyss offers you the choice on this. Like, do you want the deeply extended bass, or do you want the higher output bass in a narrower region and are willing to sacrifice some extension? That probably is largely going to depend, well, it is going to depend on listener preference, and it also will depend on, like, what kind of music that you like to listen to a lot. If you're more of a classical listener and that sort of thing, you might appreciate the bass extension a little bit more. If you listen to rock and metal, there's usually not a ton of information in rock and metal that gets down below down below about 40 or 50 hertz, and so that roll off probably is not a big deal, and you just want that extra impact and fullness that comes with the sound. So you have different degrees with which you can do that by rotating the pad here, breaking that seal, and then rotating the pad to the 4 different positions in there just to kind of tweak the sound. Now, unfortunately, the bass is not the only thing that changes when you rotate the pads there. I also found that the tonal balance through the mid-range and the treble and also that is also affected when you change that, which shouldn't be too surprising. And some of those results are good and some of them are not so good, and we'll discuss that all in a little bit. But stock pads come with these smooth back here, and then these right here, these aftermarket set that I get, these are called the ported pads, and you can see that there's texturing on here. And so what these do is, even when the pad is in the sealed position around the ear here, that these little air gaps that exist right there, I hope that shows up on the camera okay, those little air gaps basically form a port, or at least a non-sealed, so even though the pad is sealed around your ear, the ear cup as a whole is not sealed, and there's some leakage going on in there, which has a similar effect as I just described. It allows the resonant frequency of the planar magnetic driver to do resonant frequency things. And then again, you can kind of tweak the sound again by rotating these as you want, as you wish. Now, to the comfort part here, I found that anytime the seal broke, they started to get uncomfortable after some time. It's just the amount of time that these started to get uncomfortable to me changed a little bit, but they all got that way eventually. Sealed position, so the seam here, the thick part of the pad down and back was the most comfortable for me and the one that I ended up using the most, even with both pads. Also thought it sounded the best on both pads, okay? Rotate it so that the seal is back and up like this, like put some pressure right around back here on my head, which I didn't like. Ditto when it's up here and the pressure is on the temple. That one was just really weird feeling, and I didn't like that either. And it also kind of, like, I guess not the temple, but more on the jaw, and I didn't really like the feeling of that, and that also got uncomfortable rather quickly. And then pads down, or seams down and forward, was the second most comfortable position, I would say, physically, like if I just have them on my head. but they sounded by far the worst to me, and so I just didn't use that position mostly for sonic reasons at that point. Okay, but again, I do like, and I think it's a really cool idea that Abyss has, that to allow you to do that kind of tweaking with the sound, like within the stock product and all of that, and built into the design. That's cool. I just wish that they could find a way to do that without sacrificing some of the comfort issues that come along with it, at least for me. Your mileage may vary on whether or not that is comfortable or not. Okay. But again, so then other build aspects here, like you can get different finishes, like different colors on the Diana MR. This part right here, I forget what this is called, but they have different colors and design patterns that can go in right there and all that. So you can customize the aesthetic of this headphone a little bit too, to kind of just fit your personal taste and style to your heart's content. So that's an interesting thing that you can do out there as well. Then real quick, some rated specs on this is that it has a mass of about 390 grams, so it is, again, kind of on the lighter side of headphones, all that. And then it also has an impedance rated at 30 ohms and a sensitivity rated at about 93 decibel per milliwatt. The 30 ohm impedance is on the low-ish side. It's not extremely low, but it's in a range where it starts to indicate some amp drivability or driving friendly, like it's not super power hungry. The 93 decibel per milliwatt sensitivity is a little bit more middling though. So while it is fairly easy-ish to drive, it's not super easy to drive by the same token. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Okay, then Abyss also uses the word portable on their website for this thing several times, talking about portable amps. And then they list some recommended portable amps for it as well. So with that and the carrying case and just the generally small form factor and that sort of thing, it's clear that like one of the target use cases for this headphone is one, I mean, you can use it on a desktop system, no problem. But it's also like meant to be kind of a travel companion as well. Like because it's open back and all that, it's really not a true OTG or on-the-go kind of headphone. But there's clearly like an intent of use case in there of like you are at a hotel room. You're traveling, you're at the end of the business day, you're kicking back in your hotel room, listening to this headphone with some transportable source gear and all of that. And I have a couple of transportable source gears around that we can talk about how well that works. So let's start transitioning then into the sound of this thing. And then that's also going to like open up what I said at the top of the video, or returns to what I said at the top of the video, where I do think just the sonic technical package here to my ears is just really kind of behind the competition around the same price. But there is a presentational uniqueness to it, again, that I think some clearly do appreciate. And I think I may have figured out what that is and what it is that they're appreciating about it. And maybe that will help you, the viewer, decide whether or not it's worth your $3,000 to give this one a try, which is what I aim to do, is to help folks like you out. All right. So let's talk about test gear here. And let's also wrap into that like some gear that Abyss recommends that you use this headphone with. And I say that because back, in the spring of 2022, when I reviewed the Diana I'm getting my Dianas confused now because there's a lot of them. The Diana TC, that's the one. It was was $4,500 and all of that. Was a really difficult to drive headphone, right? It just really, it was fairly high-ish in impedance for a planar and also pretty low in sensitivity. And the signal chain that I had at the time to test that headphone was my trusty Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC, which I used again for this one, and the Violectric HPA V281 headphone amp, which is a pretty powerful amp and does a fairly decent job with some high-ish impedance and low sensitivity planars like the Hi-Fi Min Susvara. It's not ideal for Susvara, but it does a pretty decent job and all of that. And anyway, because I did not like the Diana TC, one of the things that came up in the community and directly from Abyss themselves was that I just had the wrong amp for that headphone, which could be partially true. Okay, I do think that that headphone has some issues beyond what amp that I was using on it, and that like that thinking crystallized even more as I was reviewing this one. But I will allow for some truth to that maybe that particular Vio amp and that particular Abyss headphone didn't get along well with each other, and that at least partially contributed to my issues. The Berkeley DAC was also identified as being part of the signal chain problem, and that I'm going to thoroughly discredit here as this review unfolds here in just a little bit. All right. However, some gear that I used to test that I have on hand comes directly from Abyss's now recommended list for using this headphone, because on their website, mere moments before I sat down to film this video, I checked, and on that website, they recommend using, one of the amps they recommend using is the Headamp GSX Mini, which I hold up to show you that I have one. Here it is. And I plugged the Diana MR into it to listen to it and see how the MR behaved. And the Berkeley DAC fed that one as well as my Cord Hugo 2. Okay. Then I also tried my Vio V281. I have the Vioelectric HPA V222 in for review. I tried that a little bit on this one as well. And also I used the HiFiMan Golden Wave Prelude amp on there as well. And then I also have in for review, and this will be coming out very soon too, the Enlium HPA 23RM little portable current drive headphone amplifier. Okay, and so I used that. This one was mostly sourced from the Cord Hugo 2 as well. Okay, and then also around I have the X-Duo XD05 Pro transportable DAC amp in for review as well, and that got some time on here. Then like sources in terms of music files and all of that are going to be all lossless FLAC or DSD locally, or streamed from Qobuz. FLAC on that one, not DSD, but using Roon, and then my Roon endpoints were either the matching Cord 2Go to the Hugo 2, or my Sonor Ultra Rendu streamers, which would have been routed through a Singer SU6 and then into the Berkeley DAC to go from there. Okay. So what did I learn from all of that? Let's start with with the pads in the sealed position, if you will. Let's just call it that, meaning the seams down and back, so they're right back here behind and like underneath the ear. The presentation on it, like the tuning, was an improvement to my ear from previous Abyss models, particularly through the mid-range. My persistent complaint with Abyss's tunings have been that the tonal balance through the mid-range is just off. There's not an appropriate relationship, or at least there hasn't been an appropriate relationship between the levels of fundamental frequencies and then their harmonics. Like, the relationship between those things is not what it is in the natural world from acoustical instruments and from human voices. Okay, and so Abyss models have often sounded shouty and honky to me, and sometimes nasally, depending on the position of the pad. This headphone, the MR here, is an improvement on that, but it is not a complete fix. Regardless of pad position, okay, on this one, I still heard that honkiness and that shoutiness coming through a lot on basically every amp that I tried, including the GSX Mini. The best amp combination that I heard for that specific issue is actually the Golden Wave Prelude on that one. I thought that reined in the mid-range forwardness, or just the tonal balance through the mid-range, like the most out of my collection of amplifiers I had to try. Probably followed next by this little Enlium here, okay, on that. And then, got it to a point where it's like it wasn't as shouty or as objectionable most of the time, but it was still definitely there and definitely distracting, and to a point where it just didn't sound real or natural to me. And at this point, I should remind listeners that, as price goes up in audio gear, I expect things, or I want my gear to sound more and more natural. In other words, more and more like the real thing. as these ears, and I fully recognize and acknowledge that everyone's hearing does vary a little bit, and everyone's opinion and thoughts on like what sounds natural is going to be different. Okay, but I want my gear to get closer and closer to my opinion of natural. And so, like, I mean, and that's a good reference because I hear natural every day. I hear human voices in the real world every day. I hear a lot of acoustic instruments with regularity just because of what goes on in my life and people around and all of that. And I grew up around a lot of acoustic instruments played in various environments and all of that. So I have a fairly good feel, I think, for what they sound like to these ears. Okay, and so, when gear starts to get expensive and it doesn't do that, I start to get a little dissatisfied, let's say, with it. And so to me, that was an issue here where just like it just doesn't sound natural through the mid-range and all of that. However, not as bad as Abyss's in the past. The bass extension in the seal thing here like does reach down pretty deep. Like I think Abyss is accurate on this claim because they say this on their website too, that with the pads in the sealed position using the stock pads, you do get pretty deep bass extension and fairly linear like planar bass that reaches pretty deep. And then when you break the seal using either the ported pads or rotating the stock pads and all of that, then you do get that bass bump. Okay, which where that bass bump is like moves up and down the frequency range by, just a few hertz, like, 10 to 30 hertz with the center of that bump moving up maybe 10 to 30 hertz sliding around and all of that. Okay, all that, which does kind of fill out the overall sound and make these sound a little bit more impactful and just a little bit more full and rich sounding generally, but you do sacrifice some of that bass extension and all of that. Now, I'm noticing as I'm talking about this, like we're going to talk about treble here, I don't really have a ton of complaints about the treble on these in any pad position. It's not quite true. There are a couple of pad positions in the unsealed things where they did get a bit sharp, sibilant, and that kind of thing, but not real often. But like the tonal balance through the treble is also decent. And that sort of thing. But like that mid-range is still very problematic for me, I think. And I doubt that I'm going to be the only one that makes that observation on this headphone out there. Okay, but if you are a listener who likes a more forward mid-range presentation and you want vocals to stand out from a perceived frequency response standpoint, then like this carries the Abyss tradition forward of doing that if that is of interest to you again. Okay. Let's talk about things like staging, imaging, separation, overall holography, and it's okay. It's not world-beating at $3,000. Like the soundstage is not particularly huge. It's not particularly small. It's just kind of what it needs to be more often than not. It didn't really stand out to me as being overly large or small in either way, so there's that. Now, the imaging and the separation is not too bad from a technical standpoint, but what I did notice is like it's kind of a linear sense to the imaging and like the way the soundstage is presented. There's like left and there's right. It's fairly close to me, and then it almost just sounds like it's a line across my face, whereas some headphones kind of do more like an arc. Okay, kind of like at a symphony concert when you've got this U-shaped arc, okay, of arrangement of instruments in front of you. This one doesn't sound quite like that to me. It's more of a line. That's neither good nor bad. It just is, and it's up to you to decide whether or not you like that. The imaging and the separation, like within that thing, again, is okay. It's not spectacular, okay, but it's not horrible either. Okay, now let's get to the meat of where I think there's going to be some disagreement going on here, and I'm going to try my best to explain what's going on here in this presentational uniqueness and then it just being behind for in technical performance for the price. The resolution on this headphone is not particularly good. It is not a particularly highly resolving headphone. If you define resolution to be that it is capable of pulling out of the electrical music signal what is in that signal. That's how I define resolution anyway. There is a presentational aspect to this headphone though that makes it sound more resolving and come across more resolving than it actually is. And it's done in a way that I think that it will find a home amongst some people, and like some people are going to call it or consider it a very resolving and maybe even natural headphone because of the way this particular thing is presented. So what does that mean? This headphone struggles to resolve and pull out some of the subtler things in a signal, like room reverbs. Okay, if there is audience noise in a live recording, for example, this kind of squelches some of that. Okay, and that sort of thing. If there are echoes that are happening, so not just, so I mean, that's a form of reverb, right? But if there are reverbs or echoes where like you hear a trail of it and it trails off and you hear like a word repeated multiple times, this one will cut out. Not cut out, but it will like fail to resolve like the really the quieter and trailing off repetitions of a sound quicker than some other headphones. And I have one right here, namely the HiFiMan HE1000se as one example, which for a long time was $3,500 US, and then HiFiMan is now very aggressively pricing this at $2,000 US. Okay, so that's one thing, one area where it's like it doesn't have the resolving capability of that. Like the live recording on the Eagles Legacy album or anthology or whatever that is of Seven Bridges Road. There's a lot of audience noise going on in that, and like one thing that stood out that this headphone, the HiFiMan, was giving to me, and this one wasn't, was first of all just the overall sense of holography and being there sounded much more natural and organic and like just realistic spatial presentation going on. Like the audience was just all around me on this one, where that was not nearly as clear and apparent on this one. And that is at least in part because of resolution. When the song starts playing, okay, you know, Joe Walsh starts doing his guitar work and on all of that, like the audience begins to clap, and those claps just kind of fade away and get lost on the Diana MR, whereas they are still there and apparent here on the HE. And I should say that I observed this phenomenon using the Headamp GSX Mini as the amp. Like I tried to do a lot of this review on that amp because of the previous example where everyone's like, well, it was your signal chain that was the problem. So here I did. I used an amp right from their recommended list and noticed that. Okay? And it's not the fault of the Berkeley DAC either, because the HiFiMan isn't adding extra crowd noise. It doesn't know that it's supposed to be in there. So all of that information was in the signal. It's just that this one brought it out to a much larger degree than the Diana MR did. Okay, so it's not the DAC, it's not the upstream signal line either. It's the headphone. Okay, so there's that resolution piece there. Now, what is a fair response to that is to say, wave theory, clapping, audience noise, room reverbs, all of that are arguably not actually part of the music. Those are just artifacts of being in a certain place at a certain time. I don't care about all of that. I just want to hear the music. Fair. I cannot tell you that you are wrong about that. If that is your approach and that's what you want, then by all means, go nuts and enjoy it, and this headphone will do a fairly good job of that. The problem is, though, all of that information is in the signal. It is there. It is in the signal. One of these two headphones pulled it out, the other one didn't. And so even though things like crowd noise and room reverbs and all of that kind of stuff, they're true, they may not be specifically part of the music. Room reverbs might, depending on the situation, but crowd noise and all of that is usually extra. Okay, You can argue all that, it's not part of the music, but it is in the signal. And so the ability to resolve that stuff is an important thing for a headphone to be able to do, so that we can trust it to resolve all of the stuff that is part of the music as well, right? So if it's in the signal, it should come through the headphone, in my opinion. But the presentational uniqueness on this thing that I think some people will enjoy and appreciate and then use to describe this as a highly resolving headphone is that the sound is somehow richly textured. So, like bows being dragged across strings and all of that, you do get that rosinousness, that zizzy sound of the string sticking to the bow as the bow is being dragged across it and all of that. Like that happens here, and it's pushed forward a little bit. So things like that, just those subtle texturing things that are part of the sounds that instruments make themselves, or the subtle variations of human voices and all of that kind of stuff, are presented here. It's very strange to me how this works, and I'm not sure how Abyss pulled this off. But I mean, I did a lot of listening on this to make sure that I wasn't going insane on that. Yeah, maybe the jury is out on that one. Who knows? Okay, but like, it kept coming across that like the sounds that are present here are just amazingly textured. To my ear, they are a little bit artificially textured. It's like the texturing is brought forward and it is enhanced a little bit. Okay, on it. If I can use like a visual analogy to kind of think, so like think about like what the sonic equivalent of what I'm about to describe from a visual standpoint might be like. You can paint a wall, and you can put flat paint on it, and you just see the color of the wall basically. Okay, or you can use eggshell paint, and then the wall has a little bit of texturing to it, right? And so it's not quite as dull to look at, and your eye just takes in a little bit more information and all of that too. Then you can come along, you can change the lighting in the room, or you can change the contrast of a camera, taking a picture of that wall, change the contrast of a camera or something like that, to make that eggshell texturing of the paint pop a little bit and just stand out a little bit more. Some way, somehow, that, to my ear, is what the Diana MR is doing to the texture of the sound. And I think because of that, some listeners are really going to appreciate it. Like, they're going to revel and really enjoy that rich and like forward and enhanced texturing of the sound. And they're going to hear that and they're going to say, wow, there's a lot going on in there. And I can kind of get where they're coming from on that. And I can kind of see why some would say that's a really highly resolving kind of sound. Headphones like this one, the HE1000se and all that, just as an example, still do the texturing. All of the texture and all of that is in there. It's just not pushed forward quite as much as it is on the Diana. But then again, the HE1000se is just bona fide pulling out more information from the signal. You know, it's actually resolving the signal and what's in it to a higher degree than what the MR is doing. And so, not to the extreme, but just to try to kind of help with the understanding a little bit here more, hopefully. The Diana MR, let's just say that you're going to get a performance from a string quartet, just a little private concert for yourself there. The Diana MR is like hearing that string quartet, like not necessarily in an anechoic chamber, but a room that's just more acoustically dead. So the sounds going on around you, all that, just are kind of, they're not as clear, they're not as forward and all of that. It's not completely devoid of echo or reverb and all of that. It's just that it's not really a feature of the sound. It's below natural to my ears in terms of how much of it is there and how long it lasts and that sort of thing. The HE1000se is more like being in an actual performance hall with those players. You hear the room around it, and it just creates a more realistic and natural sense of being there with the performers. So there is the emphasis on the sounds of the instruments themselves coming from this, if that is of interest to you, and it might be, and that's what the Diana MR gives. And then there still is that, although not quite to the level of the MR, but then just more of a focus on putting you there in that place at that time that the recording happened, coming with the HE1000se. I hope that makes some sense there. Now, for me then, like, I don't think that as a whole technical package, the Diana MR is worth the $3,000 asking price. It's significantly below that. But that's for me and my preferences and what I want from my audio. You might appreciate that enhanced texturing of the sound, and that could be what you are looking for. And so for you, it might be worth $3,000. So I will put that out there as for those who are looking for that kind of a presentation, that you might be able to get it here. Let's turn our attention here towards the drivability aspect of it. This is the easiest to drive Abyss model that I have had the experience of using. It's not quite as easy to drive as the HE1000se. I was consistently turning volume potentiometers down about an hour or two, going from the MR to the HE and all of that, and so forth, to get them to basically volume matched levels. Okay. So, like, there's that. And so most of the gear that I had around there did drive it fairly well. Like the X2O XD05 Pro that I mentioned has the power, I think, that, but not really the resolution, because it sounded, that texturing that I was talking about didn't really come through with that headphone, with that amp on this headphone, but not just this headphone. That XD05 Pro is doing it to others as well. So I didn't like that combination. I think you need something a little bit different than that. This Enlium here from the current drive output powered the Diana MR quite well. Okay, all that. This is a $3,000 piece, so you hope that it does. But it did a pretty good job of that. So, I mean, there are some portable units out there that you can get to use this portably if you wish. Okay, but all of the desktop gear that I tried powered this without issue, again, from a power standpoint and that sort of thing. So it is, again, reasonably easy to drive. All right. So I think at this point we can wrap it up. I did a lot of the comparison with the HE1000se already, but I'm going to bring it back in here because, like, again, this is the more resolving headphone, but it is also the more naturally tuned headphones. It's got better tonal balance through the mid-range for sure, at least to my ears, and the treble on it can be just as good or better than what the Diana MR is doing. I would say mostly better with the right source gear and using an appropriate cable and all of it on there too. Plus, this is much fuller in the sub bass. It has all of the sub bass extension that this does in the sealed position, but also has just a little bit more bass impact and like warmth down there and all that. And it is equally, if not more so, impactful in terms of the impact and the bass hit and all of that. Because, you know, the 1266TC and the Diana Fi and all that were really impactful, hard-hitting headphones, and this one is just not quite up to that level. It's not devoid of that, but it just doesn't follow in that tradition. But I think it does hit a little bit harder than the Diana TC did on my Vio V281 amp anyway. Okay. But like, yeah, this one it's just a more rich, full, natural sound, tone, timbre, resolution, more accurate and holographic spatial presentation. To my ears, this one is just sonically superior in basically every way. Okay, it just doesn't push forward that texturing like the MR does. So if that's the kind of sound you're looking for, then the MR is going to be the choice on that as well. The one advantage that the MR will have over the HE here is that this one is smaller, and so it is easier to take it transportably on that. You'd have to buy an aftermarket case that you can comfortably carry this one in, take it with you, but it's just a physically larger headphone. So, you know, getting it into a case of this kind of, probably bumped the camera there, sorry, of this kind of, you know, compact form factor is just going to be a little bit more difficult. Okay, but this is now $2,000. And even when it was $3,500, you know, $3,000, $3,500, roughly the same performance tier you would hope at that point. And this is just, again, not just because I prefer the tuning on this, but like genuinely, when it comes to the resolution and the holography of the spatial presentation, this is just running way out ahead of the MR. So just to me, the value on this one just isn't here, okay? But there again, it does that unique presentation thing by adding, like enhancing the textural nature of the sound that you might appreciate. And so I think it will find a home for some listeners because of that aspect. And so I'll go ahead and leave it there. So I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the Abyss Diana MR. I hope that it was helpful to you and that it helps you make a good buying decision if this is one that you are considering. So thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon, and generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. So again, thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.